The invitation arrived in a crisp white envelope, the kind that looked too formal for something as casual as a high school reunion. Jessica almost tossed it aside, thinking she had no interest in reliving the awkward days of teenage drama, but something about the embossed gold letters caught her attention. 20-year class reunion, Ridgefield High. She hadn't been back to her hometown in nearly 2 decades, and the thought of seeing familiar faces both intrigued and unsettled her. After pacing around her kitchen for an hour, she finally decided to go. Maybe it would be nice to reconnect, maybe even heal some old wounds. But she couldn't shake off the cold pit in her stomach that seemed to grow heavier the more she thought about walking back into that gym. When she pulled into the school parking lot on the night of the reunion, everything looked eerily preserved, as if time had barely moved. The same cracked asphalt. The same sagging goalposts on the field. Even the fluorescent lights above the gym hummed the same tired tune. The building looked smaller than she remembered, but somehow darker too, its brick walls casting long, unsettling shadows under the streetlights. She thought it was nostalgia twisting her perception until she noticed the windows. Half of them were completely black, as though something inside was pressing against the glass to block out the light. She tried to laugh it off, but her hands trembled when she reached for the door handle. Inside, the gym had been decorated with banners and balloons, though they looked faded, almost gray, like someone had pulled them out of storage from the last reunion and reused them. The music was a tinny echo of early 2000s pop hits, and clusters of former classmates stood around chatting, their faces half-lit by the dim ceiling bulbs. For a moment, Jessica felt comforted. These were just ordinary people, grown older, some balding, some heavier, all clinging to memories of who they once were. But then she noticed something strange. Across the room, near the bleachers, stood a group of people who didn't seem to be talking at all. They just stood there, motionless, watching. She squinted, trying to place their faces, but they were obscured by the shadows. None of the other classmates seemed to notice them, like they weren't even there. She brushed it off and joined a circle of familiar faces. Laughter bubbled up as they swapped stories about pranks, teachers, and awkward teenage crushes. For a brief moment, Jessica felt herself relax, even smile. But the air in the gym was thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe, and every so often, she would glance over at the group by the bleachers. They were still there. Still watching. And she began to notice that every time she looked away, their heads seemed to turn just a little more toward her. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled as though icy fingers were running along her spine. Then the lights flickered. It was brief, just a second, but when the bulbs steadied again, something was different. Half the gym was suddenly empty. The classmates she had been laughing with were gone, their voices silenced in an instant. Jessica spun around, searching, but the decorations now drooped as if years of dust had settled on them. The balloons sagged. The banner that once said, "Welcome back, Class of 2005, was torn in half. Panic clawed at her chest as she realized she was no longer surrounded by laughter but by silence so thick it pressed against her eardrums. And when she turned back toward the bleachers, the shadowed group had stepped closer, faces pale, eyes hollow, and smiles far too wide to be human. Her first instinct was to run, but when she turned toward the doors, they weren't there anymore. The gym walls stretched endlessly, trapping her in a place that felt like a warped version of the school she once knew. She wasn't at a reunion anymore. She was someplace else. And whatever those figures were, they had been waiting for her to come back. Jessica's pulse hammered in her ears, her heels squeaking against the gym floor as she stumbled backward. The figures continued to advance in unison, their smiles never faltering, their hollow eyes glinting with a strange, hungry shine. She could finally make out their features, and her stomach turned. They weren't strangers at all. They were classmates, people she recognized instantly, though something was grotesquely wrong about them. There was Mark Jennings, the class clown who had died in a car crash their senior year. Beside him was Lisa Thomas, who had vanished without a trace 2 years after graduation. Jessica remembered the missing posters plastered all over town. Now they stood before her, smiling like puppets with strings pulled too tight, their skin pale and tight, their movements jerky but deliberate. Her throat constricted. "No, no, this isn't real," she whispered, backing away until she hit the collapsed bleachers with a painful thud. The sharp sound echoed unnaturally loud in the empty space, as if the gym had transformed into a cavern. The figures paused, tilting their heads in eerie synchronization, studying her the way children might study a trapped insect. Then, as though commanded by some unseen force, they began to move again, slowly spreading out to circle her. Jessica's heart pounded, her chest tight, and she thought she might faint. She forced herself to move, slipping between two of the figures before they could close in. Her legs carried her across the gym floor, adrenaline numbing her fear for a moment. She aimed for the far end of the gym where an exit door should have been. But when she reached it, she froze. There was no door. Only a solid wall of aged, peeling brick that looked older than the school itself, as if the building had grown new skin to seal her inside. She pressed her hands against it, scraping her nails until they burned, but it didn't budge. Behind her, she heard the shuffle of feet dragging closer. Jessica. Her name drifted across the gym in a chorus of voices, layered and distorted, as though every figure was speaking in unison. The sound made her knees buckle. She turned, chest heaving, and saw them standing just feet away now, all of them staring, smiling. Their voices rose again, this time louder, more insistent. "Jessica, come back, stay with us." Tears stung her eyes as she shook her head violently. "No. This isn't happening. You're not real." But they were real enough to be closing the gap, their feet dragging in a sickening shuffle across the dusty floor. Jessica darted sideways, sprinting toward the trophy case in the corner. The glass was cracked, the trophies inside tarnished and dull, as though decades had passed since anyone polished them. She grabbed a metal plaque and hurled it at the approaching figures. It clanged against Mark Jennings' chest, and for a moment, he staggered backward. Hope flickered in her chest, but it died instantly when he straightened up again, smiling wider than before, his jaw stretching unnaturally far. A scream tore from her throat as she bolted into the hallway outside the gym. At least, what should have been the hallway. Instead of lockers and fluorescent lights, she found herself in a dark, endless corridor lined with doors that looked far older than the school, rotting wood, iron hinges, some slightly ajar with shadows leaking out. The air here was thick with rot and mold, each breath burning her lungs. She heard the gym doors slam shut behind her, trapping her deeper inside this twisted version of her high school. Whispers filled the hallway, a cacophony of voices all murmuring her name. Some were familiar, classmates she remembered from homeroom or the cafeteria, others unrecognizable, like strangers who had no reason to know her at all. The sound pressed against her skull, dizzying, unbearable. She covered her ears and stumbled forward, choosing a door at random, praying it might lead outside. The room she entered was a classroom, but not as she remembered. The desks were decayed, warped with water damage, their metal legs rusted and broken. The chalkboard was smeared with illegible scrawls, like someone had clawed at it with bloody hands. Jessica gagged as she caught the stench of iron and rot, realizing the words were written in something darker than chalk. She turned to leave, but froze in place. Sitting in the teacher's chair was another classmate she remembered, Ashley Rogers. But Ashley looked wrong. Her head was bent unnaturally to one side, her neck twisted, her long hair hanging in clumps. She looked up slowly, her eyes milky white, her lips moving in a stiff smile. "Welcome back, Jessica," Ashley croaked, her voice brittle, like bones snapping. Jessica's scream echoed down the corridor as the door slammed shut behind her. Jessica backed away from Ashley, her heart rattling in her chest like it wanted to claw its way out. The classroom air grew heavier, thick enough that every breath felt like swallowing mud. Ashley rose from the chair with an awkward stiffness, her head still cocked at that unnatural angle. Her movements reminded Jessica of a marionette being pulled by invisible strings, jerky but purposeful. The scrape of her shoes across the warped linoleum made Jessica's skin crawl. "I've been waiting," Ashley whispered, her voice a chilling rasp. "We've all been waiting for you." Jessica's eyes darted to the door, but it was sealed tight, the wood warping as if it had grown into the frame. Panic surged in her chest, her vision blurring at the edges. She stumbled backward into a desk, the rusted edge cutting into her thigh, but she barely felt the pain. Ashley took a step closer, her pale lips stretching wider, revealing blackened gums and teeth that looked more like jagged shards of glass. Jessica grabbed the nearest object, a broken chair leg, and brandished it like a weapon. "Stay away from me," she hissed, though her trembling voice betrayed her fear. Ashley only tilted her head further, her neck creaking like splintering wood. "You can't fight this," Ashley said, her voice layered with echoes, as though dozens of voices spoke through her. "You belong here. We all do." The classroom lights flickered violently, casting shadows that writhed across the walls like living things. Jessica tightened her grip on the chair leg, and when Ashley lunged forward, she swung with all her strength. The wood cracked against Ashley's temple with a sickening thud, sending her staggering sideways. For a moment, Jessica thought she had bought herself time. But Ashley only laughed, a shrill, ear-piercing cackle that made Jessica's blood run cold. When she straightened again, the wound on her head oozed black sludge, dripping down her face, but she kept smiling. Jessica's survival instinct kicked in. She scrambled onto a desk, pried open one of the tall classroom windows, and without thinking twice, hurled herself through. The glass shattered around her as she landed hard on the ground outside. Pain exploded in her shoulder, but she forced herself to stand, ignoring the warm blood trickling down her arm. She looked up, expecting to see the familiar courtyard outside Ridgefield High. Instead, she was standing in a barren field under a black sky. The school loomed behind her, but it wasn't the Ridgefield High she remembered. Its bricks were crumbling, its windows shattered, and parts of it looked burned and collapsed. The air smelled of ash and decay, and the silence was suffocating. There were no sounds of cars, no distant hum of a town, no wind-rustling trees. It was as though the world itself had died. Jessica staggered forward, clutching her bleeding arm, when she heard it again, her name whispered on the wind. "Jessica." The voices came from all directions, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, overlapping until they became a distorted chant. She spun in place, her breath ragged, and saw shadows moving along the edges of the field. Figures began emerging from the darkness, one by one. Some she recognized instantly, classmates long dead, teachers she knew had passed years ago, even the janitor who used to patrol the halls late at night. All of them wore the same twisted smiles, their eyes void, their faces pale. Her legs nearly buckled, but she forced herself to move, sprinting through the field. The ground felt soft and unstable beneath her feet, as though she were running across flesh. Every step sank slightly, slowing her down. The figures followed, their footsteps strangely silent, yet their presence pressed closer, suffocating her. In the distance, Jessica spotted a faint light, a single flicker like a lantern burning in the endless dark. Desperation fueled her legs as she pushed toward it. The closer she got, the more the field seemed to warp. The earth beneath her feet shifted, turning into cracked tiles and broken lockers half buried in the ground, as if the school itself was bleeding into this world. When she finally reached the light, she realized it wasn't a lantern at all. It was the glow of a single projector, sitting in the middle of the field with no screen. The machine whirred to life, casting images into the air. Jessica froze as she saw herself on display, grainy footage of her sitting in class as a teenager, laughing in the cafeteria, walking the hallways of Ridgefield High. The film jumped and skipped, playing moments of her life she didn't even remember being captured. Then it shifted, showing her tonight, entering the gym, speaking with classmates, only to cut abruptly to the empty, decayed version she now found herself in. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just some hallucination. This place knew her. It had been watching her all along. Suddenly, the projector sputtered and went dark. Behind her, the whispers grew louder, closer, until she could feel hot, rancid breath against her neck. She turned slowly, heart racing, to find Mark Jennings standing just inches away, his grin splitting wider than his face should allow. "Welcome home, Jessica," he said, his voice a guttural rumble that didn't sound human at all. Jessica staggered backward, her legs shaking so violently she nearly tripped over the broken tiles beneath her feet. Mark's face loomed closer, the hollow sockets of his eyes somehow pulling her in, swallowing her strength. His words echoed in her skull, not like sound but like a thought forced into her brain, "Welcome home." The other figures were closing in now, their pale faces surfacing from the darkness like bodies rising from deep water. Dozens of them. Maybe more. The projector behind her gave one last sputter and went silent, leaving her in suffocating blackness save for the faint glow in their eyes. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to obey. Mark leaned closer until she could see the jagged cracks running along his face, like porcelain about to shatter. His breath smelled of earth and mildew, a stench of something long buried. "You were always meant to come back," he rasped, his lips moving, but dozens of voices carried the words at once. "This place remembers. It keeps us. And now it keeps you." "No," Jessica croaked, forcing her body to lurch away from him. Her ankle twisted painfully as she ran, but adrenaline kept her moving. She didn't know where to go, only that she had to keep distance between herself and the nightmare closing in. The ground beneath her changed with every step, cracked gym floorboards, dirt, locker doors, even patches of carpet soaked with dark stains. The whole world felt like it was stitched together from broken memories of Ridgefield High, sewn into some endless labyrinth designed to trap her. She ducked into a jagged opening that resembled a hallway, her breath sharp and shallow. The walls pulsed faintly, like they were alive, the peeling paint twitching as if it had veins beneath it. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay silent, when she heard footsteps behind her. Not the dragging, hollow steps of the figures, but lighter. Quicker. "Jessica." Her blood froze. The voice was warm, familiar. She turned slowly, and her breath caught in her throat. Standing at the end of the warped hallway was her best friend from high school, Sarah Miller. Sarah, who had disappeared their sophomore year without a trace. Her hair was shorter now, her clothes tattered, her eyes wide with desperation. "Sarah?" Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. Sarah nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "You have to move. They'll find you." Jessica's chest ached with confusion. "But, you're—" "I know," Sarah interrupted sharply, her voice cracking. "I never left. None of us did. This place, it isn't Ridgefield. It's something else. Something that feeds on us." Jessica stumbled closer, her legs weak. "What do you mean? How is this even possible?" Sarah grabbed her arm, her touch ice cold. "It pulls people back. Anyone who ever belonged here. That's why they made the reunion. To lure you. Once you step through, you can't leave." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I've been here for years, Jess. Time doesn't work the same. Some of them, they gave in. That's why they look like that. But if you fight, you can last longer." The floor beneath them rumbled, and a low moan rose through the hallway like the sound of a building groaning under pressure. Sarah's grip tightened. "We need to go. Now." They ran together, weaving through the endless hallways that bent and twisted in impossible angles. Jessica couldn't tell if they were running in circles or deeper into the maze. The whispers followed them, echoing louder with each turn. Finally, Sarah yanked her into a stairwell that spiraled down into pitch-black darkness. "Where does this go?" Jessica gasped. "Below," Sarah said grimly. "It's the only place they won't follow right away. But it's dangerous." Jessica hesitated at the top step, staring into the abyss below. The air rising from it was cold and damp, carrying the faint smell of rust and decay. But the whispers above were growing louder, and shadows already shifted at the edges of the hallway. She had no choice. They descended together, the sound of their footsteps echoing off unseen walls. The deeper they went, the colder it became, until Jessica could see her breath clouding the air. She gripped the railing tightly, afraid of slipping into the endless dark. After what felt like forever, they reached the bottom, a cavernous basement lined with old lockers, broken desks, and piles of discarded yearbooks that looked decades old. Jessica bent down and picked up one of the books. Her hands shook as she flipped it open. Every page was filled with photographs of her classmates, but their faces had been crudely scratched out, leaving only gouges in the paper. She turned to the back and froze. There was her own photo, untouched. Her throat tightened. Why is mine the only one left? Sarah looked at her with hollow eyes. Because you don't belong to them yet. But you will. Before Jessica could react, the yearbook burst into flames in her hands. She screamed and dropped it, but the fire didn't spread. It simply consumed the book until nothing remained but ash. The whispers had returned, now seeping through the cracks of the basement walls. Sarah backed away, her face pale with terror. They found us, she whispered. From the far end of the basement, shadows began to pour in, thick and endless, like liquid night. Figures stepped through, their hollow eyes fixed on Jessica. Mark Jennings led them, his voice echoing through the cavern. It's time to stay, Jessica. Jessica's scream tore through the endless dark, but the sound was swallowed whole, as though the place itself was feeding on it.